Welcome to the PinkpillRx podcast, hosted by Katie and Jay Fillmore, where we navigate complex and thought-provoking topics surrounding women with a focus on education. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at Caters88 or PinkpillRx.
That's Kators 88.
If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review. I'm nervous.
You're nervous?
Yeah.
Why are you nervous?
I've never run the show before. I've never written and then led an episode before. I'm excited. I mean, this is stuff that kind of blew me away a little bit, but I'm a little nervous. I think I'm going to probably overshare. I think maybe what if I'm not prepared? What if I don't have all the facts? What if somebody who majored in gender studies just comes at me?
That's all possible.
This is how you feel every episode?
Yeah.
Man, you're brave. Okay.
Do your best due diligence.
I don't know how to start.
So today we have a special episode because Jay is leading the episode. And that's exciting for me.
Yeah.
So Jay's going to tell me things that I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't know any of this stuff. And I don't think you do either.
Probably not.
No. So there is this episode has a little bit more to do with masculinity. And there is a particular theory we're going to be talking about today that I'd never heard about before. Apparently, it's commonly referenced if you've majored or minored in gender studies. It's pretty well known. It's from like the mid-90s. There's some critiques on it, which I'll go through at the end. Have you ever heard of Raewyn Connell's gender order theory?
Never.
Okay, well, buckle up because there's going to be some twists and turns on this ride. So, Raewyn Connell. So, Raewyn Connell is an Australian sociologist who transitioned later in life in the early 2000s, but was known as Robert Connell during the development of her masculinity theory. Her experiences as a transgender woman deeply informed her understanding of gender as a social structure rather than biological destiny.
You know, I always think that people who have transitioned, particularly transgender women, have to have such a unique perspective on masculinity and femininity and like male privilege and stuff like that.
Oh, to go from having it to not having it?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? If you are a transgender woman and you had a poignant experience with that, losing that privilege and what that looked like, what that felt like, I would love to talk to you. I would love to have you on as a guest.
That would be so fascinating to hear about. Okay, so she grew up during post-war patriarchy and was educated in elite Australian institutions and became politically active during the 1960s and 1970s. Her early work addressed class, race, and education, giving her this really strong intersectional lens before it was mainstream. Okay, so Connell, back to her transgender identity, Connell had firsthand experience navigating gendered expectations both before and after her transition, right? So some pretty unique insight into masculinity and how it's socially constructed. This theory came out in 1995. I'm going to give a little bit of background on it, and then we'll dive into it. Sociology and gender studies were having some pretty big shifts, 70s and 80s. Feminist theory had gained some momentum in academia, but men and masculinity were still understudied as gendered subjects. It was a lot more about feminist theories and about feminism and not so much about deconstructing maleness and masculinity. Early studies usually treated masculinity as monolithic, just all of it's the same, or that it was just rooted in biology. But then Connell entered this gap where there wasn't really studies on it with her book called Masculinities, 1995. And it built on some other theories that were already going on. Antonio Gramsci's theory of hegemony, which is power maintained through cultural consent, not just coercion. Feminist and post-structuralist thought, like social constructionism. And then before Connell, there was no unified theory explaining why some masculinities dominate others or how masculinities are shaped by class, race, sexuality, and culture. So it didn't exist, this unpacking of masculinity, how it works, different hierarchies within masculinity didn't exist. And so O'Connell's like, all right, here we go, 1995, here's my book.
Wow. That's a trailblazer.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, so there's some questions that Connell's theory addresses, and then we'll get into it. Why do some men dominate others? That's a good question. Why do men behave violently, competitively, or repress emotions, even to their own detriment? Why do race, class, sexuality, and disabilities shape men's experiences of gender? And then how can we transform masculinity to support equality and mental health? Her theory helps shift the conversation from men versus women to gender systems.
I like that.
Sociologically.
What I desire is for people to see the system, not necessarily the gender.
Right. And so this was a big shift in that, especially on the masculine side. Shifted the conversation from essentialist ideas like men are just aggressive to social constructs of masculinity. And then from seeing masculinity as like a static set thing to seeing it as fluid, historical, and relational. Let's unpack this theory a little bit.
I'm so ready.
Interject wherever. Okay. So it's a sociological framework of how gender is structured, maintained, and reproduced in society through systems of power, culture, and institutions, not just an individual person's identity. So there's some main points here. The first one is that gender is not just about personal identity or roles. It's an organized social system or a gender order, and it shapes institutions, relationships, etc. It's not biologically determined. The main point we're going to get to later is this one: multiple masculinities. There's not like a single masculinity or way to be a man, and there are different masculinities, which we'll unpack, and they exist in a hierarchy. It's talking about like what society has inbred in you as what it means to, in this case, and what it means to be a man. And it's not about anything else. What's interesting is like we talk a lot on our podcast and TikTok about the inequity in power distribution between men and women. But this one unpacks the power discrepancy between the men and like the pecking order in these different categories of masculinities, which are pretty interesting. Another main point is that gender norms are embedded in institutions like schools, military, economy, and it makes them these like hard structural things that are hard to change, obviously, like we talk about. And then the last one is gender is dynamic and historical. So the gender order can change over time through social, political, and economic shifts. And there's some, I don't know if we'll get to this later, but there's also some good historical and contemporary examples of cultures where masculinity looks completely different than it does for us here in the West. Let's unpack the different types of masculinities. And this is really like the crux of it. There is an argument that she makes. There is a single dominant form of masculinity, and that it's culturally idealized and legitimizes men's power in society, while other forms of masculinity are marginalized or subordinated. And I think often when people talk about toxic masculinity, it's really this first type or an exaggerated version of this first type of masculinity. This was like the groundbreaking part about this is like the dominant type of masculinity in the hierarchy of, or the pecking order of men, all right? It's called hegemonic masculinity. Hope I'm saying that right. So it's like this dominant, idealized form in our culture. Toughness. Emotional stoicism. You don't show emotions. Heterosexual dominance. Authority. This type of masculinity often marginalizes other types of masculinities and femininities. And it's really common in traditional Western and patriarchal societies. So to kind of flesh it out, I'm going to give you like a picture of this kind of masculinity and some examples we might see in pop culture of this type of masculinity. It legitimizes male power over women and over other men. Men who are like identify with this type of masculinity are often cisgender, heterosexual, middle to upper class, able-bodied, and white. So I'm like, okay, well, don't like that. That describes me to a T.
Right.
But the rest of it won't. But okay, career-focused, driven, values emotional control, toughness, competition, dominance. We all know what we're talking about here. Probably avoids vulnerability or doesn't like seek help. Okay. It may feel pressure to be the provider or decision maker or protector. Lots of social privilege benefits. An example, like a CEO who works 80 hours a week, hides stress, values assertiveness over empathy. Some examples, that are nonfiction. Okay, Donald Trump, hyper competitive, aggressive, assertive, emotionally distant. Vladimir Putin projects strength, control, and power as core masculine values.
Do you remember the big controversy that when Vladimir Putin was riding a horse shirtless?
Yes.
And he's got like a six pack and he's like, there's like this, he's just like all regal on his horse.
Yeah.
And then people were in an uproar because they put it up against a picture of Obama riding a bike and he was wearing a helmet.
Oh, yeah.
And people were going crazy over that, talking about how he doesn't represent America well because he's, how does that represent strength? And how does that represent, he's wearing a helmet.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
People talking about that are definitely a part of hegemonic masculinity.
Yeah. Do you remember? I mean, I forget what year that was.
In the tan suit.
Yes.
The tan suit.
Yes.
That suit looked fly. I don't know why people were tripping about it. Dude was looking sharp.
I know.
Yeah, but that's a good comparison, the whole Putin thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's hegemonic masculinity right there. So if people who were talking about it, up in arms about it, probably are more in this camp or the second camp, which we'll get to in a second. Good call. Don Draper from Mad Men.
Okay, yeah.
Perfect example, right? Tony Stark, before he goes under some character development. And then James Bond. But I think when we're talking about hegemonic masculinity, we all know what we're talking about here.
Right.
I don't think I need to go any further in this one.
Right.
Okay. But you might be called toxic, or people might just say that's masculinity in general.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people identify masculinity as.
Right. But according to this theory, it's just one of five.
Okay.
Okay. And it's like the dominant one, though, in the West.
And that type dominates both men and women. Yes,
it dominates women and it dominates men that are in these other categories.
Okay.
We probably know more, I don't know, I probably know more people in the second category, which is complicit masculinity. So men who benefit from the like hegemonic masculinity norms, but don't fully like sink their teeth into them. So like a man who isn't like overtly aggressive or dominant, but still benefits from gender privilege, and he may passively support or avoid challenging gender norms. So like you get all the benefits from the hegemonic masculinity. You don't really fully like think that's what masculinity is, but you still reap the benefits and don't really challenge anything about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're cruising.
Yeah, you're cruising. You're not challenging the status quo. You don't really agree with hegemonic masculinity, but you're not going to speak up against it, and you still benefit from it. So like they may believe in gender equality in theory, but in practice, they still default to traditional roles. There's like a disconnect there. They enjoy the privileges without like enforcing male dominance. They'll take it though. They'll take the benefits from it. Might support women's rights, but not challenge toxic norms when they benefit him. Might do some housework. Okay. Might do some caregiving, but still sees it as helping.
Oh yeah. Helping. Babysitting. I'm babysitting my kids tonight.
Right. That's more of a complicit thing. Like you'll do some stuff, but it's really her job and you're just helping. So an example, like a liberal leaning dad who agrees with feminism, but still expects his wife to manage the kids' schedules and emotional needs. Some examples in fiction. Jim Halpert from The Office. He's kind, humorous, but doesn't really challenge the system and kind of mocks emotional or unmanly men. Like jokes about it at times. Marshall Erickson from How I Met Your Mother. He's loving, he's goofy, but he defaults to traditional, more gender stuff domestically. In real life, Chris Hemsworth supports gender equality, or equity, but often represents conventional masculinity in his roles on screen.
That is true. He does choose
those types of roles. So that's complicit. Isn't that just interesting?
That is interesting. Do you... I'm listening because I'm listening for you.
Yeah.
I don't think I've found you yet.
Yeah. I feel like I used to be a little bit more complicit, but like in a uninformed, aloof way. But complicit, it's like, oh yeah, I'm helping with the kids.
Right.
I'm not a primary emotional caregiver, but I'm going to help.
Right. That's
I'm going to help her out. Yeah. And then I want praise for it probably. Okay, another one, number 3, subordinate masculinity. Masculinities that are oppressed or devalued by hegemonic standards, often associated with men who are emotionally expressive, non-competitive, or maybe more nurturing. Often gay men are associated in this one. These masculinities in this hegemonic dominant culture we're in, they're considered lesser in this type of hierarchy. I feel like I identified a bit more with this like when I was a kid, like in middle school, because I was much more sensitive.
I'm like picturing this type being easily bullied.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, and I was. So, I mean, I identify with this one primarily when I was like in middle school, early high school maybe. Because it's not like if you're a guy who's emotionally expressive or emotionally aware or sensitive or nurturing, compassionate, you're going to get eaten alive by the hegemonic ones at the top. You're just a punching bag, you know, which is so sad. Like there's an episode I want to do in the next couple of weeks about the role of dads with sons. And it's really tragic, the emotional repression that happens because we're in a hegemonic dominant culture. And then all kinds of health issues happen as a result of it. It's so tragic. Basically, these guys are seen as unmanly. May face homophobia, bullying, exclusion, like you said. Likely to express emotions more freely. Often excluded from dominant male spaces like sports teams, corporate circles and stuff. Experiences pressure to toughen up or mask his femininity or feminine traits, traditionally feminine traits. May find refuge in alternative communities or creative spaces or activist spaces. Some examples in real life. Timothy Chalamet.
Okay, can I do you know what I'm
Yes,
talking about?
yeah, go ahead.
We have a funny thing going on with this particular actor because we can never say his last name correctly. And so because we can never say his last name correctly, we always make it up a lot of times. Timothy Chalamet.
Yeah,
Timothy
Charlemagne.
Chalamet.
Champagne.
Timothy Champagne.
Shamamana.
And so what we do is when we lose each other or we don't know where one or the other is at, whether we're at home or in public or something, we'll say Timothy, and then the other person responds back, Chamalalau or Shamalale or whatever, like saying his last name. So anyways, it's like Timothy. And then, yes. So I would say to Jay, I would say Timothy. And then I know where he's at.
Yeah. It's a nice call.
We love you, Timothy.
Yeah. Oh, I love Timothy Chalamet.
I have no idea. That's why I say Shamalama.
And there's the accent over the E in his end of his name. So I don't even know is it really Timothy? Is it Timothy? Okay. So like he embraces emotional vulnerability and softness.
And you see that in the roles he chooses
You
too.
do. Yep. He's also very competitive with his acting too, though. So I know that is a little bit more of the hegemonic traditional stuff, but he, at least, you know, I think he was probably more in this example. Lil Nas X, right?
Okay.
He's a queer artist. He defies gender expectations in music and how he dresses and stuff. So that's the subordinate one. You're kind of like oppressed or devalued, right? Number 4 is marginalized masculinity. Okay. And this one's really kind of like somewhat contradictory. It's men who might have traits of hegemonic masculinity, right? Hyper-competitive, dominant and stuff, but they're denied full power due to race, class, disability, or other identities. So like an example, you can have a black man in the United States who displays toughness or dominance, but is still structurally marginalized.
Okay.
Even though maybe individually, this individual could fit more with a hegemonic identity, he doesn't get all the full benefits because of something like socioeconomic status or race or disability or something like that. So like you might be tough, you might be dominant, but you don't get all the power of it. You have these different like systematic barriers like job access, criminalization, or social surveillance. Might have adopt hypermasculine traits like stoicism, like not showing emotion or aggression as a survival mechanism because they have these other disadvantages. They might like feel like these deep contradictions because they're celebrated for masculinity in some settings like sports and criminalized in others, which really makes me think of African American men. Yeah. Celebrated in sports, in athletics and stuff, but then like you're really stereotyped and criminalized in these other settings. just because of the color of your skin. So you're marginalized, even though you might even have hypermasculine traits, but you're still marginalized. You don't get all the benefits as if you were not a minority of some sort. Some examples, you might have Colin Kaepernick, football player, right? Black guy, strong, athletic, but he was penalized for his activism. Stephen Hawking, this driven intellectual pursuit and leadership in science, but he had this disability, so he didn't get to access all the benefits as if he was able-bodied, as an example. Walter White from Breaking Bad. Middle-class dude whose masculinity is challenged by his illness and his economic vulnerability. Okay, the last one. Now, this one is not like originally in Connell's model, but it's widely discussed in contemporary interpretations of it. Okay? Have you found me yet?
So far, I identify you more with the sport now.
Right, which I thought too. And then, but I'm like, it doesn't quite fit.
No, it doesn't quite fit because you can be very assertive when you need to be very assertive and
Yes.
and you are very tough.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for making that public. Okay. This one is called...
But I'm definitely attracted to the subordinate one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why.
more emotional availability.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that.
I need
if it isn't like, bullied out of you.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. All right, here's the last one. Again, they're not in the original theory, but it's contemporary interpretations. It's often discussed along with the other four. This is resistant or progressive masculinity.
I can already tell I'm going to like this one.
This is like an evolving, more recent one. Some character traits are like empathy, emotional intelligence, gender equality, allyship.
Check.
I call this an Aragorn masculinity, personally. They reject dominance and violence. They embrace gender equality, allow for emotional openness and empathy, and critique traditional gender roles, like being a stoic man. These guys are emotionally expressive, values care, and practices shared power. May face pushback or ridicule from more traditional men, like complicit or hegemonic. Often works in or just supports education, social work, activism, caregiving. These guys build their identity around inclusion, community, and being vulnerable. And they want to deconstruct patriarchy, not just for women's sake, but also to be freer himself. An example could be like a stay-at-home dad who teaches consent to his sons, attends therapy, and critiques sexist jokes with his peers. Some real-life examples. One...
Jay Fillmore.
See, do you see me more here than the subordinate one?
Yes, for sure.
I think so too. Terry Crews, great example of this, right? He advocates against toxic masculinity and for emotional intelligence. Great example of this. Prince Harry, well, formerly Prince, I guess, just Harry now, right? Didn't he give up being a prince?
I don't know what his technical title is.
Okay. He speaks openly about mental health and supports gender equal parenting. And then another one is Harry Styles. He's known for his gender fluid fashion and anti-toxic masculinity messages. So these guys are examples of that. Fiction, Ted Lasso.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect example if you've seen Ted Lasso. Yeah, he's definitely this type of masculinity. To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch.
Okay.
The dad stands for justice, compassion, and equality. Those are a couple of examples of it in fiction. So those are your 5 different types of masculinity in this theory.
That is very interesting. I think we group all men into the hegemonic category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we group men in the hegemonic category who are marginalized because they're a minority of some sort or have a disability of some sort. Like an African-American man or a man with some type of physical disability. Even if you exhibit hegemonic dominant traits, you're still not getting all the benefits. You're not at that part of the power hierarchy.
Right.
Even though you exhibit those traits.
Right.
And so there's a pecking order here. Hegemonic's at the top, complicit is second, and then you have subordinate and marginalized. And then you got this progressive one that's kind of like almost, it feels like a little bit separate from the rest.
When I think of healthy masculinity, I think of the 5th one.
Mm-hmm. It makes me like almost look at my peers differently because I'm thinking, where are you in these 5? You know what I mean? Like, I think I have friends who are complicit, for sure. I think I have some friends who are subordinate or marginalized. I don't know if I have that many friends that I would consider progressive, though.
Yeah. And I don't think you have very many friends that you would consider hegemonic.
No, I don't. No, I do not. No, I don't get along with those people. I can't. I just don't jive with you.
I feel like there's not always a lot of depth there.
You know, it goes back to the thing about when you're boys. It gets suppressed in you, and then these other things get exaggerated in you. Because it's cultural and societal, and this is what's celebrated. The dominant form is celebrated. So then you are reared and to be guided by default into this hegemonic one. And so even it, like maybe in different circumstances, if you would retain some of your sensitivity as a boy, you might end up subordinate instead.
You've mentioned your bullying quite a few times on the podcast. Mm-hmm. Can you share some about that?
Yeah. In middle school, like I was so not confident and didn't have a lot of friends. I was made fun of for my weight quite a bit. And I was sensitive, so like I wasn't one to really like do a ton of fighting back. And if I did verbally, they were just quicker with wit than I was, type thing. And I was an easy target. So in hindsight, I know that these guys who like it made them feel powerful, and you could do it to somebody who wasn't going to cause you problems in return. Yeah, but I was made fun of. If my voice were to crack in class, I was made fun of for the way I dressed or made fun of for the way I looked. I had a guy made up a song about me because I was overweight. Yeah, and I remember being like targeted, especially like in PE classes.
That's so sad.
And I was not athletic. I was not athletic at all. And I I'm not playing sports. I'm taking art classes and doing acting and stuff like that. I was very creative and not athletic at all. And that wasn't celebrated. And so,
and what's interesting is historically speaking,
mm-hmm.
that was at a time celebrated. Like you have the philosophers and the artists.
I think the Renaissance.
Yes.
Yeah, the mathematicians and the botanists.
Right. And that was like, it's interesting how the ideal masculinity or the dominant masculinity. Well, I don't even know if that was like, that probably wasn't the dominant masculinity at the time, but it was a respected masculinity.
Yeah.
Versus now, I don't feel like it's respected at all.
Yeah.
I feel like over time, our idea of masculinity has become more and more narrow.
Yeah. I wonder if that's with the rise of like, we're more connected as a society with communication and popular culture. Like it used to be, 150 years ago, it's just you had the newspaper and you had books. Maybe you got a telegram.
I read somewhere that the average person, and I'm not going to be able to, I don't know where I read this at. Okay, so this is just anecdotal. Mm-hmm. But the average person, like way back when, in their entire lifetime, was exposed to the content of one New York Times newspaper.
Yeah.
Like that's all the information outside their individual circle that they would ever come across throughout their life would be the complete, like one complete newspaper.
Yeah. And now we're just inundated with all the time.
Yeah.
And our brains, like, from like an evolutionary or adaptive perspective, like have not been able to adapt quick enough for all the advancements.
Yeah, because we're not meant to be exposed to that many things outside of our control.
Right. It brings anxiety.
Hopelessness.
Because you don't have anything actionable to do about it.
Exactly.
There's a study from World War II that showed that those who could actively do something to contribute to the war effort at home exhibited less anxiety than those that did not have anything actionable to do about it. Because the ability to like do something about it, even if it's small, gives you some type of agency, to where like you're not as anxious about it. But we have all this news all the time that we can't do anything about the vast majority of it. So it's just anxiety producing because you're like, oh, I'm encountering information I'm helpless to do anything about all the time. You mentioned how almost like this progressive masculinity was more celebrated in the past or accepted, like philosophers and that type of thing.
I think that's more of the...
Or subordinate?
Subordinate.
Yeah.
Subordinate masculinity.
So there are some ways that like masculinity, that this theory talks about, were like how it's relative to culture and in history. Hegemonic masculinity has changed over time. 1950s hegemonic masculinity, you were married, breadwinner, emotionally restrained, father. 80s looked different. It was more like a corporate warrior, a competitive alpha male. So today it might be like you're successful in fitness or tech, but still like in this framework of male dominance. So like it looks different at different periods of time, right? But also like different cultures and time periods had different masculinities. And this is kind of going what you're saying. In ancient Greece, masculinity emphasized philosophical control and honor, where now it's more like dominance.
Right. That's probably what I was thinking about.
Yeah. And like, not to say there wasn't dominance present then, but masculinity emphasized those things more, like philosophical control, honor. Samurais, right? Masculinity emphasized loyalty, discipline, and aesthetic refinement. 19th century British masculinity idealized Christian virtue and imperial duty. So like masculinity is really historically constructed in like really culturally specific ways, and it's not biologically universal. Because it's different over time in a different culture, so it's not biology. It's just whatever's emphasized in the culture. Like culture says masculinity is this. So then over time you internalize it, and that's like the gender identity that you have.
Well, I think that just seeing how masculinity has changed historically over time shows that gender is fluid and can change.
Yeah, and then it's not biology because our biology is the same. Like masculinity is different in a different culture or a different part of the world, but our biology is the same.
Yes.
And biology now is the same as it was in ancient Greece. So what's changed? The culture has changed, not the biology. So gender is definitely a cultural thing. There's some interesting like other cultures like in the present tense that have different like types of masculinity. Do you want to hear a couple of those?
Yeah.
So one is the Aka, which is a Central African Republic in Congo. So their cultural type is egalitarian, hunter-gatherers, and traits of masculinity there are nurturing, gentle, emotionally available. So like fathers spend a lot more time in close physical contact with infants than in any known culture. Masculinity there includes emotional closeness, nonviolence, and responsiveness to family needs. And men engage in cooperative rather than competitive behaviors. Another one's in southern Africa, in like Botswana area. It's the Kung. I don't know if it's an exclamation point at the beginning. I don't know if it's a sound or like some type of accent sound, but it's the Kung San. They're hunter-gatherers, masculinity traits gentle, nurturing, emotionally expressive. Fathers, again, highly involved in child rearing and frequently engage in affectionate touch and co-sleeping. Displays of aggression or emotional detachment are socially discouraged. Men openly express sadness, grief, and vulnerability. Okay, I'll give you one more. This is in Papua New Guinea. Trobriand Islanders. Okay, the cultural type is a matrilineal agricultural society. Masculinity traits are expressive, relational, and ceremonial. So masculinity is partially related to one's ritual performance, storytelling, and emotional engagement and kinship. Men cry publicly during funerals and emotionally intense rituals, and this is respected, not ridiculed. Relationships and emotional intelligence are vital for male status. Do you notice anything that all these have in common?
Men being with their children, being emotionally available.
Mm-hmm. Where are all these different places located?
Not in the West.
Not in the West. Interesting. I did some research and I was like, okay, where are some cultures where emotional expression was or is integrated into masculinity? And I don't know if all these are contemporary or some of these are historical, but all the ones that I found were not European-based, not North American-based, not even Latin American. None of these are particularly Western influenced. So Western is the one that has the hegemonic kind. And it just goes to show that, like, it's not the only option, and it's not biology that puts us there. It's our culture that puts us there. Because other parts of the world, either contemporary or historically, that's not what it's like. It's actually more like the opposite. Should I mention any critiques of her theory?
Yeah.
It's been very influential, but there's been criticisms over the decades. It really talks about mostly power relations between men. It doesn't give a lot of attention to collaboration or emotional complexity. Like, it's too binary. It was developed in Anglo-Australian and Western contexts, and critics argue that its categories don't translate well across cultures, which obviously, I just mentioned cultures where these categories do not translate at all, because it's not the type of masculinity they have. So, like, in many non-Western societies, hegemonic masculinity may not be tied to individualism, heterosexual dominance, or economic power. Indigenous, African, or Asian masculinities often embed spirituality, elder respect, or communal duty as central. So again, non-Western stuff looks very different. This one's interesting. So it suggests that the model doesn't explain how masculinities change over time or how one type becomes dominant. And then there's some later scholars, one last name Bridges, one last name Pascoe, attempted revisions like hybrid masculinities to address this.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very Western-directed theory.
Yeah, like, it's good to explain masculinity maybe in the West.
Right.
But it doesn't translate universally necessarily because we got problems.
Yeah.
So this one's interesting. So Connell includes marginalized masculinities. Framework was not initially grounded in something called intersectional feminism.
Can you define that term?
Yeah. So it was coined by a legal scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, in 1989. It's a framework that understands how different aspects of a person's identity, like race, gender, class, sexuality, disability, etc., intersect to shape their experiences of privilege or oppression. She argued that Black women's experiences of discrimination were often overlooked because feminist movements centered on white women and anti-racist movements centered on Black men. And so you have Black women who are just kind of caught in the middle without really being the ones that have a voice, like, just for them. So intersectionality was introduced to explain how multiple oppressions operate simultaneously and not separately. Another example, like, a poor homosexual Black man may experience all forms, subordinate masculinity, marginalized, simultaneously, which challenges like, oh, which of these 5 parts do you fit into? Because maybe you fit into multiple different categories of masculinities. Connell was like, yeah, there's cultural limitations to the early work. It's a model, a starting point, not a whole system, which I thought was pretty humble. It's just interesting that there is this cultural negativity towards masculinity. You can label it individually as toxic masculinity, but at least me as a man, like, I feel like when masculinity, even toxic masculinity, is talked about, I kind of feel like all eyes are on me, and like, I'm being viewed in this umbrella, you know? Whereas masculinity is more complex. Like, there's actually these potentially 5 different kinds. And I don't want to be viewed as complicit or hegemonic just because I'm male, when that's not even the type of masculinity I embody anyway. Do you know what I mean?
I'm sure a lot of people feel that way about a lot of different things.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, that's just the male experience. It's my white male middle class cisgender heterosexual experience.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that was very educational, Jay.
Stay educated. Take your pink pill. Pink pill today was by a different manufacturer.
It's from a different manufacturer.
Different manufacturer. Hopefully there's no side effects, and hopefully it was received well. I hope for those of you listening, something was intriguing or sparked a curiosity, or you felt affirmed or challenged. Stay educated. Take the pink pill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.